All right. Hey, everybody. It's the 10th of June, 2024. This is Go Live Coding with Gimbalabs and friends. And I'm going to share a screen. Here's Zoom. And here is our course in Andamio. And what we did, it's been a few weeks since we've had consistent sessions. There's been a few things going on. Anybody else spending time writing Catalyst proposals, for example, since we last met? Can I change the size of this?
Yeah, wait, I don't know if it's been since we last met, but
Since we last met? Okay.
we
That doesn't
slapped one pretty quick.
slapped them together. You guys can see the Cardano Go PBL outline on my screen, right?
Yes.
All right. This was aspirational, launching in June. We'll see if we release something live this month, but no pressure to decide yet. Just to pick up where we left off, you can see that maybe 3 weeks ago, we came up with this course outline of these modules, moving from the tools of development to node interactions into simple transactions, reacting to chain events, making queries, and then finally some of the deeper stuff around building an app that can interact with smart contracts that can properly serialize data. And then Chris, this is genius, what to do when none of the above actually works. This is how we put our feet on the ground and really support people to become part of an ongoing journey. I think that's awesome. And contributing is part and parcel with that. You'll see that many of these have some learning targets drafted, and you can see the numbers here, and some of them don't yet. That's okay. We'll continue to write those. But even when I look at the details of a module, a lot of these are just outlines. What we did last time we met is we built an outline where we were able to say, okay, here's some topics we might cover, but now we can start turning these into learning targets, these I can statements that you can see in some of them. Once we have those learning targets in a spot where we feel really confident moving forward with them, then one by one, we could start writing lesson content and assignment content. These are the things that people will be able to do to create evidence for themselves, and if they want to, for a broader audience about what they've learned by working through this course. So just from that summary, does anybody have any questions, practical questions about how this is organized or anything like that?
Is this, I mean, probably you talked about this somewhere in some of the other videos already, but the course, is it supposed to work a little bit like exorcism? If that's the correct name, where you can just have a bunch of, you mean,
Sort of. Yeah, Exorcism has a really nice engine for checking your code on the fly, right?
yes, and it has all these kinds of small tasks, like build a function that reverses a string, build, and then there's some fun story. I remember the blah 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 lasagna, and you have to, and so it's. This is more a general question on the PBL maybe, or you can just drop a link where I should go read about PBL to know.
This is great. We're rolling out. We've been refining this methodology for the last 3.5 years. We're working on the 5th iteration of just a general course for Cardano devs called Plutus Project-Based Learning. And then this is a more specific one, but it is very much like any platform that gives you a set of tasks and invites you to work through them. What we're doing here is we say, look, first of all, let's define the things that people should be able to do after they work through those tasks. And then this assignment piece right here, this is how we would then add a task that allows people to do something, right? Do a project where they would demonstrate one or more of the learning targets right here. Now,
Yeah.
right? So obviously these learning targets are not complete yet. I can select some subset of them, and it doesn't matter which ones I pick right now. And so this would be an assignment. Oops, Dashlane is popping up there. I don't want that. Let's turn that.
Oh, that's like the admin interface where you then add these assignments for someone else to consume, not necessarily everybody.
Correct. Exactly, exactly, right? So this would be, but I want you to see how a learner can then interact with this. So this module is about interacting with the node, right? So this would be some project about a node level query. Okay. Interacting with the node. And we can give it a fun title later. We got that. This is the creative part, is defining this thing. But once we do it and we go take a look at the assignment, we can add some content. Oops, sorry about that Zoom screen. All right, so we could have an intro here, and then we could have some step-by-step instructions. Clone this repo with a link, whoa, repo, run it locally, do a thing, right? Now, this creates evidence, and that's the really important part here. So if I just go take a look at what this will look like for a student, there's two types of things we'll do, and it might be on a future roadmap to provide some of the functionality that a site like Exercism offers, right? Validating code on the fly. And that'll be a really neat frontier to explore. I think there's some really cool infrastructure that we could use to build that. But for the earliest release, there's two things that a student will be able to do. They'll be able to create a note to themselves by pressing this button right here, set assignment status. And they can either say, yeah, I did that, or I want to come back to that and complete it later. And they can write just a private note to themselves about what they want to remember. This is really important, right? So it's wonderful that it's possible to have feedback from the site itself to say, yes, you got that code right. But there's also limits to what we can assess in a space like that. And what we really want is for learners to say, yeah, I did this thing, right? I did a task that made it very clear to me that I was able to do these learning targets, right? And whether or not that check can be automated, our job is to communicate to learners, here's what success looks like, right? So another section we often include right here, we give a little introduction about an assignment. We give step-by-step instructions for how to do it. And maybe we leave some holes there, right? We say, okay, we're going to get you this far, but then the next part, you have to figure that out on your own. But then a final section here is you will know you are successful if, I'm not sure which of these words to capitalize, right? But that's a heading, right? And we could have a screenshot here, right? Or what you will see if this assignment works. Something like that, something simple that can be summarized in an image or two or a sentence or two.
Mm.
And why is that important? Well, why is blockchain monetary policy important, right? So much of it comes back to this concept of sovereignty. Right? We talk about agency or independence or sovereignty, and that's what we want for learners as well. How do you know a thing? Because you know it. You don't have to ask somebody else for proof. So we help people understand how to do that. And the platform here gives us a little place to record that. And this is a deceptively powerful, simple question right here. What do you want to remember about this assignment? When you ask this question to somebody and have them just pause for a second. Yeah, what do I want to remember about this? Even if I don't write anything here, I've paused to think about it, and I'm more likely to be able to access that knowledge later. Even better, I write a little note to myself. Oh, I got Goroboros running. It was mostly a piece of cake, but I got stuck when I had to set the node to node connection, So now I can write a little message to myself like that. And then later, when I come back to this assignment, I see my little note to myself, private only to me. And there's a learner dashboard where I can see all the assignments and little notes I've written to myself so that I can come back to that later. Once again, the audience for this being just me to make sure I know these things. Even once we have all of that, then the other audience for assignment evidence is the wider world. And so we want to be able to share that publicly. That's the blockchain part of Andamio, okay? And this will be active. We're working on this during the current sprint that's launching today. A lot of the transactions are already working, but we just want to make sure that the UI is ready for people to really start playing around with this. So you've got your local, right? Here's what I want to remember personally, and then your public and on-chain attestation that you were able to complete this assignment. Who's got questions about the structure here? Okay, so with this in mind, now we can start thinking about, all right, what should the assignments be? Let me go back to this view. Right? We can give titles to these modules that indicate at a high level what we're going to cover. We can define as student learning targets the specific things that students are going to know and be able to do when they finish this module. And then most importantly, we can define what are the things that people will do? What are the projects in the project-based learning part? That's where we can really think about these assignments. I've discovered that there's two primary patterns that happen when you're building an assignment. One kind of assignment says, hey, you know that task we did in lesson 101.3? Just make sure that you did that and that it ran successfully, right? So there's the kind of assignment that just points to a specific lesson and says, do the thing in that lesson. Another primary kind of assignment is one that extends from the lessons. Hey, remember those things we introduced in lesson 101.2.3 and .4? Now let's tie it together. And if you understood those three lessons, now you're ready for an assignment where you're going to attempt to do X and Y and Z. There's probably other kinds of assignments, but those are the two main ones that I think happen the most often. How much sense does that make?
For me, a lot.
Erez, I saw your hand up for just a second. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it looks really good. I have to get going soon, but I was just thinking as a learner, it would be really nice to have a feature next to each lesson, like with a troubleshooting section, and then maybe it would go to like a link or something with like places where people could get stuck and maybe people could write where they're getting stuck, or it could have some solutions for like try this instead, something like that.
I have an example feature to debut here. If you have a moment to just stick around, okay? So here is a lesson. We didn't write this lesson yet, but let's suppose we did, and let's just publish it.
Sorry, I have to go, but I'll watch it later
Okay.
with the recording.
Cool. Enjoy
Okay, thanks so much.
See you soon.
Take care. Okay.
So one thing that was just implemented last week is when there is a lesson like this one, right? We've got the learning target at the top. We've got the content, which is usually going to be much longer than just a heading and one line, right? This will be the meat of the lesson. We also have a nice little chat window right here. And this, for anybody who knows about it, this is built on Nostr, which is a protocol for social media messages. And we have the ability for people who are logged in with their Discord account to Andamio now to ask questions. And this is using the Nostr protocol under the hood. So hoping to do some fun experiments here in how people start communicating, what questions and resources are shared. That one's for Erez later to catch up on and for us to play with. So for us, that brings us to, all right, well, we've got an outline. It's still in progress. And as we refine learning targets, one of the most helpful things I think we can do is think with the end goal in mind, right? What is the assignment going to be in a module titled Interacting with the Cardano Node? And where we're providing, okay, here's a starter kit. We have to change this into a learning target. We say, okay, you need to be able to fetch specific blocks from a remote node using node to node, okay? You have to be able to synchronize the blockchain using one of these approaches. And you need to be able to fetch info about the node's mempool contents. What could the assignment be? What do we want people to do at the end of this module so that, first and foremost, they feel confident that they can do these things?
I don't understand the second question, because how would I, as a user next to the Cardano node, be able to decide on which block to fetch from a given peer? Or is this like, is this more about telling the node which block to fetch from a peer, or me talking to the node? I probably just answered my own question while talking about it.
Worth it.
So it is about me talking to a node and then just saying, I want block X from you, and not about the node talking to other nodes and requesting specific blocks, right? Because that's the only thing that might make sense.
This is such a good question. You're putting yourself in the shoes of the learner. How will I know that I can do this thing that's kind of identified in learning target 101.2? Chris, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, you know, the easiest way to look at this is, you know, because we're talking about using it for node to node communication, right? You know, so showing that you can show the number of transactions in a block, the block height, or you know, slot and hash. Right. So, I mean, you know, with those things, that's pretty much showing, you know, that you're actually able to get the block, right? And, you know, potentially confirming them with, say, some third party, an explorer or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can confirm that this information is valid, you know, by looking up the same transaction ID, right? Same hash on an explorer and seeing that it's the same.
So, right,
Right.
like you will know you're successful if, and we could provide screenshots here. Here's what the output should look like for number one, and here's what it should look like for number two.
Yep.
Obviously, yours won't be these values. So when you can see something that looks like these screenshots, then go over to an Explorer and make sure the values are the same.
Right. Right.
And this is an example that doesn't have to be like a sexy hands-on project yet. We want to get there soon. But often in this early module phase, yeah, we're just doing something practical to make sure things work. And we're assuming that people who are engaging in this course in the first place are starting from a point where, okay, yeah, they want to go a little deeper into Cardano Go development, and being able to see these things will be motivation enough to keep going. Right? If they're not motivated by this, that's okay. We can point them back to a higher level course like Plutus PBL.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so this would be do a thing would actually mean to show the number of transactions by writing Go code and not somehow, for example, using the CLI or whatever other tools there are out there.
Correct.
This would be specific for, okay.
Correct, right? So yeah, we could do this with Cardano CLI, and maybe some people have already even done that by the time they get to this course. But now we're going to do it with the Goroboros starter kit.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, right? So now, okay, yeah, I can see that on my screen. I can see that. So we can provide screenshots. Provide for step 3.1 and 3.2. Okay. And then once you can see those, it'll still be a terminal command, right? Then confirm on a block explorer that values are indeed up to date. That's pretty much it. So what would be the what can we call this project? This is viewing node information.
Or the example would be more transactions, like viewing transactions through in your local node or something.
Right. View block and transaction info in
It's not really transaction info though.
right.
We are explicitly only viewing the
block.
block.
We're looking at blocks, right? So
Yeah.
view block and view block info.
Well, actually, no, it is transaction because of the mempool. So once we get to 1014, so view block and transaction info, it's probably good.
With started here. Yeah, something like that. Sorry, I didn't learn how to type yet this week. Started here. So something along those lines, we can give a little intro, give a step-by-step instruction. You're essentially doing all these things if you can do any of this. But we're explicitly looking at 101.3 and 101.4. And this is always an interesting thing to think about, right? To be successful on this module, I don't necessarily have to run the Goroboros starter kit on Demeter. We're showing people how to do it there. But we don't care whether you did it this way or whether you took the initiative to run the starter kit locally and view the same results. What we're really measuring in this assignment are that you can make sure to do these last two things, for which we could say that the first two are building blocks or prerequisites towards that.
Not exactly.
No.
So the second one is a protocol that only exists node to node. There's a specific block fetch protocol. So like if you look at the so there's the way that block fetch works, it works completely different node to client and node to node, because of course it does. But when you're working node to node, one of the things they've added at one point along the way is pipelining. And the idea of this is through normal operation, when you're talking to other nodes, you only download the block headers. And then there's a specific protocol for block fetch. And so block fetch allows you to give it any single or range of blocks to fetch from a node. And it does not download like the headers. It just downloads the blocks. So this is we actually have in the starter kit a actual just block fetch, which does not synchronize. It gets a specific block. In our case, what we do is we get the tip and then we just ask for the tips block, right? So we just get the current block basically, in our example. So the point is you can do that without necessarily kicking off full synchronization. And so, it's like we start with first is you are able to fetch a block from a remote node, right? Like, so that's the node to node. And then the next thing is like we can actually kick on chain sync and do that same thing, but continuously. And there's two different ways of doing it. Node to node does it one way and node to client does it another way. It's pretty transparent, within Goroboros and that sort of thing. When it comes to like, when you just say start up a chain sync, like it makes it transparent. But there's two different ways of connecting to the nodes to do those things. So the exercise there is kind of like, now how do we do node to client, right, in general? And then, like kicking off that block fetch and the chain sync. And you actually kind of get to see that the chain sync looks the same from a user interface, whether it's node to node or node to client, after you've made the connection. Like that's the difference. There is how you connect to the node. And how you connect to the node basically identifies which protocols you're allowed to use. So what we go from is we go from fully trustless, like node to node, I'm able to fetch a block, right? To now you have node to node chain sync. And then we add node to client to that, which allows us to now talk node to client. And then the next step is, now that we're talking node to client to a node, right? What's the next thing we do is now we start investigating the mempool. So now that we've established that node to client connection with the node, right, we're now using that connection to do other things besides chain sync. You see what I mean? So it's like we've kind of bridged from, like, we've gone from the fully trustless chain sync and fetching blocks to like now we've moved on to something that's a little closer to the node, and you're actually inspecting, like the node's mempool.
I think actually that differentiation in itself would also be helpful if that was something I'm still. If you have the opportunity to connect to the, no, let me restart that sentence. If you're new to this and then you hear node to node or node to client, and which one do you want to use, I find it a little bit difficult to understand. So it's not really clear in the beginning of when would I choose which over the other and why. You just alluded to some of the points, I guess, which is different protocols that you can use, but that's probably a little too detailed for coming to this for the first time.
Unfortunately, it is not too detailed. It is a requirement for understanding to be able to write code on the chain. You're going to need to understand these unless you are consuming fully from a remote API that has abstracted this stuff away.
Well, then I just wanted to add that maybe then also part of, I'm not sure if that is maybe one of the other things already earlier mentioned, that there is actually a difference between the two, because the 3 minutes you just explained can probably be rabbit holes all in itself, every single one. So yeah, I just thought that.
Well, so this is what's exciting, is we have the opportunity to think about the sequence of steps that'll get somebody to that basic understanding, and to do so in a way that doesn't make it feel too complicated, right? So that's the task before us. And before we publish this lesson, which I should unpublish before I forget that, that's what we need to achieve. So that's incredibly exciting. And these conversations are getting us to exactly where we need to be. So this step-by-step is not perfectly accurate yet. It's a work in progress. But the other thing that's happening here is we recognize that it's by working on this assignment, we see that we really need to make sure these learning targets say what we need them to say. So now we're in this iterative process of moving back and forth between what we're going to teach as clearly stated by these learning targets and what the learner is going to do as outlined in the assignment. So let's stay at the what we're going to teach perspective for just a moment here and really try to finalize these learning targets. So for this one, it should be.
So I think,
oh, go ahead.
I think back on 100, then
Mm-hmm.
we
Yeah.
should have a, let's just say, about what, Cardano, about blockchain, about Ouroboros, right? Like, I mean, you know, like we need to cover those things because we've kind of gone with an assumption that is wrong, right?
Yeah.
That the learner already knows these things. And, you know, so we're going to need to, instead, we can't jump directly to Go without first giving them the, you know, like understanding, basically a intro to, you know, let's say blockchain itself, and then Ouroboros specifically. So really more like an intro to Cardano, I would say. And then, you know, like you said, Ouroboros. Yeah, so that looks good. And those would probably need to be before. Yeah, let's just say Cardano Go development. Yeah,
Prerequisites and tools of development. And maybe
there we
we
go.
want to say about Cardano first, about Ouroboros second, and then a little
Yep.
intro to these. And the only reason these are here is actually for catalyst reporting. We promised
Yeah.
little
Definitely have to do
intros
that.
to these, but these are drafted so people can see what these first three look like. And the challenge in front of us is that so many developer facing courses start with an about Cardano, or maybe you've seen about EUTXO, or if you're really deep, about Ouroboros, right? And this is shaky ground here, because how do you say enough to give the engaged learner what they need to know in order to keep going without making people's eyes glaze over? Oh, I can tell I'm just in the introduction here. They're just giving me all this background knowledge because they know they have to. But when am I going to do something? When am I going to get hands-on? People start getting itchy about that right away, right? So we have to say just enough, right? Here's the short version of this, the way you haven't heard it before, that's going to make you want to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like for example, I could see about Ouroboros being fairly quick, right? Fairly.
Well, and for the lazy
know,
approach, this could easily turn into an epic long form essay, right? Like that's without.
I mean,
work
yeah,
to write an epic version of this.
Right.
And I also maybe I have another thought. I totally get the point that about Cardano, and to some extent also maybe about Ouroboros. Well, if someone is landing on this PBL for Cardano Go project-based learning, I assume he already heard most of the about Cardano stuff. However, each of the tools down there, so Apollo, Bursa, and Edda, all provide a solution, or a solution to a specific problem. And maybe before the tools, one could talk a little bit about the problem in general. So Apollo, I haven't used Apollo much yet, but kind of talk a little bit about why Apollo actually exists and what it allows you as a developer, not really Go or Cardano specific, but just in a general idea. And then the same thing for Bursa. What is a wallet? What does a wallet need to do in, again, short, simple sentences to not knock off the more experienced users. And then Adder as well, also as one more complete example of an application that does things. And kind of describe a little bit the general problem space and then the specific solutions that the course is going to work with. Maybe that, if that makes sense.
So what if now we're getting into finalizing these learning targets. So what if the wording was something like this? Again, this is just a first draft. We get to work on this. What if we said it this way? I know enough about Cardano to start this course. Hey, sucker, right? Like, are you here for the right reasons or not? Do you know enough about Cardano to take this course? Right? We can just poke the learner a little bit and say, hey, are you ready to be here? And that can be really motivating if we do it right. I understand the essentials of how Ouroboros works, right? We can just drill down to those. And like Manuel was saying, I got to understand why these three things were built. Why are we introducing these here? Talk about the problem space and how these things solve the problem. How does this wording feel to people for maybe these last three learning targets?
Better. I mean, about Apollo wasn't that much of a sentence anyhow, right?
Right, exactly. Those were just placeholders. And sometimes when you're writing an outline, right, you say, oh yeah, in this lesson, I'm going to cover Apollo. I'll think about it later. Right. But
Yeah.
now we're really drilling down to what's the student experience going to be. I could see this being a really nice way to start the course. Who else has thoughts on this part right here?
Yeah, I mean, I like it, because the ideas here is essentially you should have a general idea of, blockchain in general, which we would assume people, kind of would. But the point is we should make sure, right? And then a little bit about specifically Cardano, but again, like you said, fairly surface level, right? Fairly surface level. And then, talking about Ouroboros just a little bit, right? Because you don't have to go into too much detail other than, essentially the parts that people really care about to start with, which means the only thing you really have to talk about is, like chain sync and then just like transactions, which is kind of what we've done. Right. And we're working our way through that. And, just, yeah, I mean, like, I don't think that we have to go into all of the detail of all of the other protocols at all at this point.
Right. I agree.
Right. So the only thing basically at this point, what we're really talking about is node to node, because that's what's going to kind of make sense. And I think that's kind of where we're getting to, is by the time we get like halfway through like 101, we're realizing node to node doesn't do everything we need.
Yes.
And that's when we kind of like introduce node to client. And you kind of already put it in the other document where we're like, how can we connect a node to client? But I think it's just kind of like we get to a point where it's like we start to block, and it's almost like, where is, let's say, there must be an easier way.
Yes.
Right. Like, how do I, because you start realizing you're like, oh, I've got to chain sync everything, and then I've got to index everything, and then I've got to do all this stuff. And it's like, there's got to be other ways. Right.
Yes.
And, so.
Exact. Oh, that's beautiful. Right. And that's a good story, right? When I read a novel that makes me turn the pages, it's because I'm being told part of something, but a new tension is being set up. Oh, that's the next thing, right? So we say, oh yeah, okay. Here, let us show you about node to node. That's the first thing we want to tell you about Ouroboros. And then you realize through the next series of lessons that actually your knowledge is limited. And we say, okay, well, here's the next thing you got to know, and here's why. And once people experience that cycle once, they're more likely to keep going. All right, so we've got some basic ideas right here. And then the other thing is, as we continue through the course, right, often assignments or projects are the most difficult to write at the very beginning of the course because they feel trivial and artificial. As a course continues, it actually gets much easier to build assignments and projects because we know somebody's already on the bandwagon, and we can start showing them, okay, here's a project that you can now sink your teeth into, right? Imagine how building simple transaction might be different from just looking at a terminal output on my computer screen, right? this creates on-chain evidence that something happened. That's really exciting. You want to find out if you did this assignment correctly? Go look up a transaction hash on a block explorer. That's yours, right? Whereas this is going to feel, right, artificial. The other thing that happens as we continue through a course is we can start having connecting through lines. You can have a project that you work on in parts over a series of assignments that span many modules. And that's the role I think Andamio CLI can play in this course. I think by the time we get to module 102 and beyond, one of the options we're always going to have in these modules is implementing a feature in an open source project called Andamio CLI that allows you to look at as evidence for something the work of this real project that exists. And we've been using it, right? To build Andamio, we've been playing with Adder, and we've picked up some interesting expertise along the way that I think prepares us to just show people, hey, that you're now learning on the Andamio platform. Actually, under the hood, here's something that's happening. Let us show you a simplified version of that, let you play with it, and then give you a task, right? Here's a skeleton version of Andamio CLI. And we could even have like the answer key, right? In your math textbook, you can always look in the back of the book for the answers. In the same way, we could have a more complete version of Andamio CLI that people can refer to anytime, but we can also have them working on an assignment where they implement one of those features in a partial implementation. Does that concept of like a through line and projects getting easier to build make sense?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the course, now people have already been working on kind of modified projects that are really geared towards learning. And we say, hey, if you've been doing the assignments throughout the course, you're already ready to start contributing. All right, here's the frontier of our work. Here's the unfinished stuff that, you know, you've learned about the stuff that we've built enough to share with you so far in this course. And what's that phrase everybody likes to say? It's still early. It's still early, and there's a lot of work that you can contribute to. So we start pointing people out to that.
I like that. However, I would also add some, I mean, when I was thinking about smart contracts or in general, maybe at the end, just some thoughts about potential projects for his own mind for the next weeks. I mean, contributing is nice, but I'm not sure everybody would want to contribute directly because he feels like I'm just fresh out of school and I don't know. I think people might. Well, anyway, what I was trying to say is,
well, the thing is that's imposter syndrome, and we should cure you of that by the time you're done with the course.
That's right. So, well, but how cool is that? Okay, look, our highest level of success is for people as they work through this course to not only feel confident that they can contribute, but also that they have relationships so that they can say, yeah, you know what? I got one foot in the door and I think I'm ready to contribute, but is there somebody I could talk to about that? Right. And the right 15-second conversation can make all the difference here. So as we get into the contribution phase, yeah, if we're successful, people are going to feel good about that. But I like the idea of maybe having a place where, all right, hey, if you don't feel like you're quite ready yet, here's some other things that you can explore. But even if we did provide this, it would still encourage people to come back to this. All right, here's an example project. All right, and guess what? That points to some ongoing work.
yeah. And it didn't mean it to be one or the other. I mean, it's just
some people like just to have an exercise, right? I mean, that's why like to-do list tutorials are famous, right? If sometimes I just want to sit and work all the way through, try to build something end to end on my own, because I have questions that I need to sit with before I'm ready to go talk to somebody else about them.
and also kind of bringing it all together in not so much of an individual, single, specific topic exercise. Like gluing it all together makes the whole thing a little bit more tricky because you have to adapt a little bit and you can't just take the same code, right? So, but yeah.
Right. Well, and that's why we want projects that form a through line from one assignment to the next, right? Because ideally, suppose, like, I don't think Andamio CLI will be the only project we use to create such a through line. Maybe there might be one or two or even three mini projects that give people something to look at. And this is what we do in Plutus PBL. We introduce people to the user view of a Cardano application when they first start the course. Then we show them what the validator code looks like and how to compile it in the next module. Then we show them how to build basic transactions to introduce those validators in the next module. And finally, right, 4 modules later, we look at some front-end code, and full circle, now you've seen how to build the application that you were introduced to in the very first module. So, right, building piece by piece, revisiting the same mini application 4 different times, and eventually that gives you the way to tie everything together. We want to do something like that here so that people have seen that through line. And by the time they maybe get to something here where they're looking at the details of the CBOR to work with a simple application, they can say, all right, I've been building this knowledge one layer at a time, and piece by piece, I've seen how it all fits together into this application that I keep getting a chance to look at. That's our task, right? That's the challenge that we have of building this course. But I think we're already off to a really good start just by virtue of these conversations. What are some other projects that might come to mind? If we say, okay, well, Andamio CLI is a tool for getting information and doing some admin level tasks around this application called Andamio, right? And we can kind of look at that. We have other examples that we could refer to, right? So for example, our production facing work with Adder is not incorporated into Andamio CLI yet, but it could be. Right, and we could have an Andamio CLI command that says, show network tokens or show courses on the network. That's all great. But what are some other projects that would be fun to build and that we could revisit several times as we work through these modules? And that might be a question for everybody to think about over the course of the next week. We might not answer it in the next minute. So for next steps, how would everybody feel about just taking that question and, whether you want to put yourself in the position of somebody who's learning Cardano Go development, or just any of us who have been a little deeper in it, but we are thinking about what would be a cool thing to show people. Let's all just think about that this week, and maybe bring some ideas together next. And we'll keep fleshing out this course and start writing some content.
Sounds good.
Cool. Next week, we'll make sure to bring people in as contributors. I thought we might have time to look at that today. It'll just take a moment, but we can leave that for next week and give everybody a chance just to keep thinking at a high level before we jump into that next Monday. Till then, thanks, y'all. If you're watching this video on YouTube, we meet on Mondays at 1400 UTC. And you can find all the details of this meeting and other public meetings at gimbalabs.com/calendar. Chris, are we doing a bonus session tomorrow? Should we say a word about that?
Maybe.
Okay. Well, there might be a bonus Go Live Code session tomorrow, but we'll make sure to ping everybody on Twitter and Discord if that happens.
And record it.
And record it. All right. Hey, till next time. Thanks for being here for this, everybody. We went kind of deep into the course part, but I'm really excited to jump into this with everybody. So thanks for the space and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.